This is the original PlayStation controller. It's got all the essentials that you need for gaming, including a D-pad, some buttons, and the 2 shoulder buttons on each side. However, it's likely missing a few things compared to what some people want from their PlayStation 1 controller. The Dualshock, released in November of 1997, has 2 thumbsticks, one on each side, a bigger L2 and R2 button, and built-in rumble support. So this is likely what most people think of when it comes to the PS controller, and clearly, it's an improvement over the original release. However, what if I told you that in between these 2 controllers there was actually another PlayStation controller to sort of bridge this gap, a missing link between the original and the Dualshock? What am I talking about? It's the PlayStation Analog Controller. Released in April of 1997, so half a year before the Dualshock, this controller is actually quite different from the Dualshock. Noticeably, right off the bat, is going to be those thumbsticks. I absolutely love those. I think it's so much better than the sort of mushroom bubbles that they would not just put on the Dualshock 1, but also all the way up to the PS3. Also, a much bigger grip to hang on to. If we grab the Dualshock back, you can see that the grips are actually longer, and for someone with huge hands like me, that actually feels way better. And the L2 and R2 buttons even have a bit of a bump on them, so you can easily tell which one your finger's on when you're kind of trying to press them back there. Unfortunately though, one downgrade compared to the Dualshock is that there is no rumble support in here, even with those bigger hand grips. However, one other cool thing about this is that you're not going to see it right off the bat, and it has to do with that analog button in the middle. Normally when you press this as you're playing a PlayStation game, a red light will turn on, and that lets you know that you can now use the thumbsticks to control the game instead. However, not every game is compatible with the analog thumbsticks, and that is because, as we just looked at, the original PlayStation controller did not have those thumbsticks, and for a game that has support for them, it has to be specifically programmed in. That's why you can't just take any game off the shelf and expect it to work with the thumbsticks. You always want to look at the back of that case and see if it has that analog controller compatible logo on there. And if it does, you'll know that when you press that button, that light comes on, you can use the thumbsticks to play the game. But where the analog controller gets really cool is if you press the button a second time, the light turns green. And this means that the controller is now emulating an early Sony PlayStation peripheral released in 1996 called the analog Joysticks. It's like a giant arcade pad. It would have been great for flying games and such. And when that green light is on, the 2 sticks on the analog controller now emulate those 2 sticks on the analog joystick pad. And why this is neat is because if we look at some really early games, like, we're talking long box style here, way back, and you look at the back, just like we saw that analog controller logo, you'll now see the analog joysticks compatible logo, but no analog controller support. So if you want to use the sticks with this game, you have to either have the joystick gamepad or the analog gamepad with the joystick emulation, and then you can play any other game that has that logo with the sticks instead of the D-pad. So yeah, it gets kind of complicated, but that's one reason why it's worth kind of searching out that controller. As there weren't that many games that had exclusively analog joystick support, eventually that emulation was dropped in the Dualshock when it came out, and that's why you don't get that green light if you press the analog button again. The analog function alone typically gets the job done, but still, this is just such kind of a neat controller. It's just kind of like a weird middle thing, out for only about half a year, much like the Game Boy Light before being dropped for something else. I'd love to hear down in the comments below if you had heard about this controller before. Sometimes I think it's like this crazy thing that, not many people know about, and other people surprise me and they're like, everyone knows about that, but maybe they're confusing it with the Dualshock. Regardless, I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments, and just overall hope you enjoyed, and hope you'll join me next time for something different. So thanks, and take care, everyone.